Hello, today is the 23rd of April in the year 2021. My name is Sarah, and I am interviewing José Torres-Tama for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. So please know, Mr. Torres-Tama, that this recorded interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at the University of Texas at Austin. So if there's anything that you don't wish to answer or talk about, I'll definitely honor your wishes. And if there's something that you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. So because we're not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 5 questions, and please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. So there are 2 questions that we need to make sure you agree to before we go on, which is Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at the University of Texas at Austin, and will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials that you donate to Voces. So do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library?
Yes, I agree, but will I have access to that interview as well?
Yes, the interview will be posted on our website and as well as our YouTube channel, and so you'll definitely have access to it.
Then we are good.
Okay, good. Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any materials you provide?
Yes.
Okay.
But
Do you
again, hold on, let's just make sure we get everything straight. That yes, totally, but will I have access to, again, the most important thing for me is to make sure that I have access to, that I can send people to this particular Voces University of Texas interview.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we'll want, we would love for you to share it with
Okay.
people that you know in your community. So absolutely, yes. Yeah. Okay, and then do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, we have many questions in a pre-interview form that we've already filled out, and we use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. So the entire form is kept in a secure Voces server, and before we send it to the Benson Center, we would have stripped it of any contact information for yourself or family members. So that won't be a part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible to the Benson Library. But do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
Yes, you can do that.
Okay.
Now, is
Thank
this
you.
interview going to be, it's a recorded video interview, right?
Yes, so there's going to be a recorded video file and an audio file, but yeah, it's mainly video.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to have your cat continuously chiming
I
in.
know. I know. I hope not. Well, hopefully, it's going to be mostly you talking, so I don't think so. Yeah, but I'm trying to make her be quiet. I know she was being calm earlier today, and now she's being kind of crazy. Okay. On occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone number or your email with journalists?
Yes, you have that consent.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, all right, then let's go ahead and get started. So I want to ask you a few introductory questions first. So when and how did you become interested in, the arts and in performing?
So I studied fine arts and poetry, and I studied the literature of plays. But early on, as I was writing my poetry and studying fine arts, as you can see, I'm a visual artist, and I migrated towards performance artist and performance art. But I also did early on, while I was in college and writing my poems, I was going to poetry readings and spoken word readings. So I was always very interested in that. In fact, my first venture into that form of taking the word and making it become flesh and speaking and performing it was at a place that no longer exists in Hoboken called The Beaten Path. And I remember it so well because it was the first time I was actually on stage. So I didn't know about performance art. I knew about the visual arts, and I knew about artists trying to get themselves out of the canvas, but I also studied poetry and literature and the literature of plays. And I was a big fan of the work of Federico Garcia Lorca and Bertolt Brecht, both of them being poets and amazing experimental playwrights. Later on, I became very much influenced by Ento Saki Shange, who wrote For Color Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow's Enough, and she wrote in Spanglish, and she was the one that really influenced me into creating the choreo poem. So my early performance pieces were basically a composition of poems choreographed where the word becomes flesh. And For Color Girls really moved me because also Entosaki, the amazing Entosaki, I had the pleasure of meeting her, also used Spanglish, right? And that offered me uh, the permission it gave me. It was exciting, and it gave me the permission to begin using Spanglish, which is part of my regular vocabulary, right? I'm in that hybrid place, and I create my work at that barrio corner where social consciousness meets experimental performance. So I migrated towards performance art very heavily when I first moved to New Orleans in 1984. After college, I came here. I had been in Europe during one of my college years, and I loved the architecture. I was actually studying architecture early on, but I studied fine arts and creative writing. And when I got here, I was really moved by the street theater that I saw. Really on Jackson Square, named after the odious Andrew Jackson, one of the worst presidents ever, who wrote into law the Indian Removal Act back in 1830. We have to understand that these statues still remain. They're littered across the country and certainly littered here in New Orleans. And I'm going to take them down NOLA to try to bring down the Andrew Jackson, because we can't get any satisfaction until we take down Andrew Jackson, right? So some jokes I do just for me. So, and that's part of the mantra that Take 'em Down NOLA has. But I was informed by the street theater because I saw the Dirty Dozen brass band performing right in front of the Cabildo in that square that was also called Plaza de Armas because the Spanish were part of the colonials who were here. Both the French and the Spanish were brutal slavers, and they were French, Spanish Catholics, and the Catholic Church was part of the enslavement. That's why I was raised Latino Catholic, which is like saying doubly Catholic. It's like saying Catholic Square. It's like saying Polish Catholic, Irish Catholic, Italian Catholic. I am post Catholic because of my understanding of how Catholicism by the Spanish was used to really obliterate the indigenous rituals, our indigenous people. I was born in Ecuador, Guayaquil, South America. I am part Quechua native, so I'm Quechua, Spanish, German, and we even have some, I believe, have some Turkish in our family. Quite the hybrid, really. And we have to remember that the church, like the Catholic Church and others like the Baptists, were very much involved in the slave trade. They actually supported it, and the French and the Spanish were brutal slavers. Now, the Spanish Quarter is really what it needs to be called. It's called the French Quarter. There is nothing left except one building about one building that represents the French colonial architecture, but it was rebuilt by the Spanish after fires that were nearly 9 years apart in the late 1700s. So it's really the Spanish Quarter. It's a misnomer. It's a lie. One of the things that I gravitate to is exposing the lies in the United States of amnesia. It shouldn't be called the French Quarter. It needs to be called the Spanish Quarter. That architecture is much more Spanish. In fact, there are three jewels of Spanish colonial architecture that is exemplary in three cities of the Caribbean: Havana, Cuba, right? Puerto Rico, San Juan. I've been in San Juan, and New Orleans. Here in Louisiana. These are considered the three jewels of the post-colonial architecture. No, I'm sorry, the three jewels of the Spanish colonial architecture. So that's a long response to that question, but I gravitated towards performance here in New Orleans really much more directly. I began street performing. As I began street performing, in order to support my bad habit of creating politically performance art, I eventually became a comedy juggler and performed on the streets of New Orleans, and there developing my improvisational skills, which are part of my performance cauldron or my performance powers, if you will. Having come from the visual arts, I create very visually dynamic performance work. Having come from poetry, I create what I call verbalas, which is verbal bullets, where the word becomes flesh. And having been engaged in studying pantomime, my work is involved by movement as well, ritual. And with Aliens, Immigrants, and Other Evildoers, my sci-fi Latino noir solo that has been touring now for 10 years, we have projected images of short films and also projected images of the hate crimes against Latin American immigrants here in this country, or Latin people in general, whether the US citizens, residents, or undocumented people, or people that don't have the citizenship. Yesterday in The Guardian, I read an article about the fact that we have to stop using this odious term illegal aliens, because we cannot forget that the first illegal aliens in the hemispheric Americas were who? They were the Europeans. The Pilgrims arrived in December of what was it? In December of 1420. So last year, December, um, was their, yeah, no, it was a 400 year, 1620. It was a 400-year anniversary of the Pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock. So I always ask myself, if the Pilgrims arrived without papers, why were they not deported? With Columbus and history ships, they, the Europeans, were the first illegal aliens. If you want to use that term, they were the first illegal invaders of the hemispheric Americas. And of course, Columbus and his dumbass thought he was arriving in India. And what did he do? He started calling all the native people, especially the Taino people in the Puerto Rican, what is now Española, and the Cuban area, and the Puerto Rican, and they wiped them out, but he called them Indians because he thought, his dumbass thought he was in India, right? And these are the way misnomers continue. Why? Because the Europeans have been writing the legacy. So for me, the Europeans are still part of the main problem in this country, and they espoused white supremacy. Look at the Pilgrims. They were escaping Christian, they were saying they were Puritans. They were escaping apparently for religious freedom. They got here, and the same people, the native people in that area who taught them how to farm, they began figuring out how to kill them and take their lands. What kind of a mentality is that? That's the mentality. If people would read, if they gave, and I say this continuously, I'm beginning to read this with my boys, if they offered as sophomore year an entire study of Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States, we would have a revolution in our hands, because the first thing he does, immediately he quotes Columbus. And what does Columbus do? He experiences the Taino people, and he says, wow, they're peaceful. They don't even have weapons. I can enslave them within, with a small group of the 40 or 50 people he had. That was his mentality. There's an intrinsic evil nature. And I get dramatic and emphatic because that's the reality. How do you begin exacting genocide on the people that just taught you how to farm the land? Because the Pilgrims were actually eating themselves, and that's what Howard Zinn goes into. And the natives taught them, and yet they immediately looked to kill them. So there's something in that genealogical makeup of the European that is evil, straight up. You could do whatever you want. You could do whatever you want. You could hypothesize and like, oh, look at the things. No, the killing comes from the European plantation paradigm, straight up. So that's why I'm so emphatic, because of the fact that indigenous people, I am part indigenous. We forget in the hemispheric Americas. It's the hemispheric Americas. There is no such thing as America. America is a made up moniker. They began using it. I'm trying to find the exact time, sometime in the 1900s. I think it might have been Woodrow Wilson, who's an odious individual. They started using the moniker of America. No, it's the hemispheric Americas. I was born in South America and raised in North America. I'm more American than most people here, right? And in fact, I'm connected to the land. I'm part Quechua native. So because we suffer so much from amnesia, people forget that it's the hemispheric Americas full of indigenous tribes. There were 500 nations in North America. Let's make sure we understand that. The European has been spilling blood since they got here, and their descendants continue to do that. The killings of black police, the killings of white police, of unarmed black citizens, that's been happening forever. That's part of the nature. And the same thing with the Spanish. They killed the indigenous people. They did whatever they could to enslave them. They wanted to enslave the indigenous people here, but they knew the swamp territories. Bienville, there's nothing to celebrate about. Bienville, he was a brutal French Catholic colonizer who enslaved the Atacapa, the Chitimacha, and began slaughtering the Tunica tribes, the Atacapa tribes, the Chitimacha, the Natchez, the Homa. We have to understand that, but this is a country that is driven on amnesia. So myself as a performance artist, I gravitated to it because it's a cauldron for me to expose the hypocrisy of the so-called beacon of democracy.
Yeah,
That's a
thank
long.
you. That's a great. I know that was a great answer. Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's very interesting. I mean, I think that's a really good reason to become involved in things like that. And so in your answer, you kind of talk a little bit about your identity. You're born in South America, and you have um, indigenous roots. So in what ways is your identity kind of reflected through some of your art in your performance?
all of my work
Yeah.
is inspired by the trauma that I've experienced as a brown mestizo immigrant born in Ecuador in Gringolandia, in the so-called beacon of democracy. The only way I can deal with this trauma is to transform it into art. So I was born in Guayaquil City. Guayaquil is very interesting because Guayaquil is actually a beautiful city. It's got its dangerous elements because it's a port city. So I can't wait for the opportunity to bring my children there because I have a lot of family still there. But Guayas and Quill, his queen, Guayas king, the Guayas, I forget what the indigenous tribe were, but excuse me, they were about to be conquered by the Spanish. They held out quite a fight. And in a particular historic area, the Spanish were looking for gold because they were obsessed. All the Europeans were obsessed with gold, and they saw that the native people had these, gold plates, but the native people didn't imbue this metal with the lust and the fervor to kill that the Spanish and all the other Europeans um, imposed upon it, right? That drove them. So the story goes, and I've been doing some research on it, they're about to be captured and surrender. But Guayas knew that his beautiful queen, Quill, would be raped by the conquistadors because that's what the conquistadors did. They wrote the book on pillaging and raping and establishing Catholic churches on top of the indigenous temples, whether it's Aztec or Maya or uh, Incas, right? That's what the Spanish did. They wrote the book on colonization and pillaging. Well, King Guayas moves forward to apparently present some gold, and he takes a knife from one of the conquistadors. He kills Quill and he kills himself because he rather be killed because he knew they were going to be enslaved, and he knew they were going to rape his beautiful queen. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine having to deal with that as your life-ending situation? So the city is called Guayaquil, right? Their names together. And apparently their blood flowed in the river because that's what the Spanish did. They filled the rivers with blood. The Spanish were brutal. The Spanish were awful. They wrote, and I speak Spanish, which is another language of the colonizer. I'm disconnected to my Quechua people. And in my own family, since we have the German Europeans, there's a lot of prejudice and biases within my family. I'm like the darkest in my family, and not just metaphorically speaking, right? Some jokes I do just for me again. I am brown, I'm mestizo meaning that I'm a hybrid, born of the Spanish rape of our indigenous women. And we also have German. Tama is a German last name from Bavaria. So my origins, my Ecuadorian origins, have always influenced my work because I saw through the prism of my brown skin the injustices early on. My mother's very fair. You would look at my mom and she's fair. She's as fair as you are. She's got the German and she's actually got reddish hair, right? But she was there with a brown child, and when she spoke English, it was obvious that she had a Spanish accent. And my mother to this day believes she speaks English. You know, I I would challenge that to some degree. I love my mom because I get my strength from her Virgo directness. But we experienced not being served at restaurants in New York where there was total bias against prejudice against the Puerto Rican people, right? The same way my moniker in Catholic grammar school, was Spick. I was called a Spick all the time. That's like using the N word towards an African American. The same way that in the Southwest, they'll call you wetback if you're Chicano. They'll use whatever derogatory term is available to gringos who were actually Italian, Polish, and Irish, whose own parents were discriminated against before, but now they had migrated into whiteness. And in migrating into whiteness, they were there to oppress the other people of color, including myself, the Filipinos, the Indian people coming from India, and anyone who looked Arabic, or anyone who was non-European, because their whiteness afforded them the privilege to migrate into the white power structure. And this was at Catholic grammar school. So I always say that whatever commonality we had in Catholicism, it did not protect me. from their vicious hatred that was imbued upon them, imposed upon them by their own parents, who continuously probably said, "Oh, these spics are here to take our jobs. They're filling the country. These Puerto Ricans, they're taking, they're taking the Northeast. They're taking New York. We were in Jersey City. I arrived here in 1968, and the country was on fire in September, right? So I became very conscious very quickly because it was obvious. I lived in a Hispanic Latino in a Latino, Hispanic is a term imposed by come up with Nixon and Reagan to try to codify us. I rather gravitate towards Latino. I'm not sure about Latinx because my question to Latinx is Latin Y, Latin Z, right? I understand what the ideals are about it, but I gravitate towards the term Latino, Latino Americans, or Latin Americans, just to make sure that we don't engage with the gender disparities. And I'm totally aware of that. But I know what it means to experience the prejudices. I've experienced, because of my brown skin and because of my articulation and my writing, I've experienced that prejudice with police, white Italian Irish police, thinking I'm an uppity spick, the way they would think I was an uppity N-word, right? This is the way that police, and especially the Irish and the Italians, they migrated into the power structure and began imposing their police brutality upon people of color. And this is the cycle that continues to haunt us today. So all of my work has been influenced. I've been dealing with the anti-immigrant hysteria. This is a new era. I've been dealing with it for the longest time. In fact, in 1954, there was something called Operation Wetback. And I look at history, right? And it was really quite funny because when they were talking about it during the maybe it was 2017 or 2018, during the height of the Trump era and his brutality, putting children in cages, they were talking about different laws like zero tolerance policy. And there was in 1954 Operation Wetback, and the white NPR people couldn't say it because it is a derogatory term until the Chicana said, "Oh, you mean Operation Wetback?" And they were like, "Yes, that operation that." Yeah, Operation odious word, that it was a law that's like the Chinese Exclusion Act, lets me sure. And Democratic celebrated FDR, Japanese internment. Come on, man. They all have blood on their hands. No statues. Take down Jefferson. Jefferson, are you kidding? Thomas Jefferson. This is why I informed myself in US history, because it suffers from amnesia. Jefferson created the caste system that we still live together to this day. I was looking forward to going to Charlottesville to go to Monticello, because Monticello was the epitome of the plantation paradigm, right? Jefferson, who wrote All Men Are Created Equal, that stopped at the plantation door because he owned hundreds of slaves. And yet he had a caste system. He had the house Negroes, he had the landscape Negroes, and he had the field Negroes, right? That's exactly what goes on today. And now you also have your Latino people, your house Latinos, your landscape Latinos, and you have your field Latinos. If we were to stop during the pandemic, if those people that are sometimes odiously called illegal aliens, who are bringing our foods, not Jesus and Mary, no, Jesus, Maria, and Jose are bringing you the food, right? If they were to stop during the pandemic, if they stopped working in those fields and they're not getting, we hear about essential workers, are they getting raises? If they were to stop, we would have a food shortage during this pandemic. If I
Right.
sound emphatic, is because I am emphatic about it, because I
Yeah.
found the entire system corrupt and it's got to come down. This
Yeah.
system, Biden is trying to reconstruct. Look at what Biden's doing. I'm grateful, but we haven't heard about the camps. There's still children in cages. What's going on there? We got to keep pressing. And I'm grateful that he had the courage to bring on someone like Kamala Harris, who actually called him out because he didn't vote in the proper way on the right side of
Yeah.
history for the desegregation. And let's make sure, and he actually had the courage to get beyond himself. I think he's evolved, because I wasn't excited about Biden. He was in the shadow of
Right.
Obama when Obama was the deporter in chief and deported 3 million of our people. And that's just a low number, because there are estimates that are more. But he had the courage to get beyond. Like he's evolved. He's like an evolved white grandfather that's trying to do the right thing as much as he can within a corporate system that's polluted, right? And Kamala
Right.
Harris, so important for so many people to see, myself included, to see a woman in that seat, right? A woman in that position, a hybrid woman, right? Because we're all hybrids. And yet this white purity bullshit has been in this country forever, because it's founded on white supremacy that Jefferson wrote into the Constitution. They were actually going to put in, we white men white property owning white men. They were like, ooh, that sounds that sounds too real. That's what they were actually going to write. And they're like, all men are created equal, which opened the door for us to contest their hypocrisy, right?
Right.
So, and then Julian Castro called him out, called out Biden on the fact that he supported the deportation. That was a really smart point
Right.
for Julian Castro to make sure that he did that. And what did Biden do? He got past himself and he involved Julian Castro in the administration. He's trying it looks like he's trying to do the right thing in a very polluted system. Because I'm not crazy about the Democrats. I only vote Democrat because of Johnson and citing and signing the Civil Rights Act,
Right.
right? And the
Right.
Voting Rights Act that
Yeah.
later led to the Immigration Rights Act for more people to migrate here,
Mhm.
right? So, but let's not forget the Democrats were the Dixiecrats. They were the Ku Klux Klan party. I know because the Southern Democrats here, they're like, we call them Blue Dog Democrats. They're like just an inch better than the Republicans who are just odious. So, next
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you bring up really, really interesting points because I know you speak at length about the ways in which immigrants have kind of been erased from the narrative surrounding the rebuilding of New Orleans after Katrina. So, do you notice a similar trend happening with COVID? And I'm just going to add, what do you think it's important for people to understand about immigrant work throughout the pandemic, and how can we kind of push back against the erasure of Latino and immigrant voices from important historical narratives, which seems to be like a pretty big component of your work?
All of my work is based on understanding the hypocrisy of United States history. I've learned the language as a poet and as a writer, and even the lawyerese, because I've had to sue the New Orleans Police Department. I've learned the language to be able to use it as a weapon to expose the hypocrisy of a country that believes itself because of Hollywood that it's the beacon of democracy. So let's get back to COVID. Let's understand the reason why there's so much fear within Black, brown communities. Let's start with Puerto Rico. There's a great writer, and I'm blanking out on her name. She's like the Pablo Neruda, and she's written a book about the sterilization of Puerto Rican women that took place without their understanding in the 50s. She herself was exposed to some atrocious U.S. white doctors and their experimentation in the island of Puerto Rico. We just learned Cameroonian women and Latin women in the ICE jails in Texas, no, in Georgia, were being sterilized. That's serious. The atrocities continue. That's serious. That didn't happen just yesterday. That was exposed in Georgia in happening as an ICE jail practice. Where are we? Like um it was either late 2019 or right during or no, mid 2020 during the elections. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, like it was in the summer of 2020 before the elections. Yeah, no, so I personally believe that we have to have Nuremberg trials, and I'm writing about that. We have to have trials because look at Miller, look at all of these people, the cadre of criminals that even the chump himself, he's gotten away. They committed murder the same way the Bush administration. And what did Obama do in his first 100 days? He said, we're not looking back. And yet he spoke in his speech that we were going to address the fact that we didn't have to have, such invasive national security and having people disregard the law. And yet Obama did the same thing. He called Snowden, made him public enemy number one. They're hypocrites. The entire system is polluted. Getting back to this situation right now, of course, did we hear anything about the essential workers getting vaccinated right away? No, we didn't hear that. We heard about them getting COVID right away because they were still doing the work because, NPR is part of the problem. My friends during the Iraq war called it National Pentagon Radio because NPR supported the invasion of Iraq. There's only one report in the New York Times. It was either Paul Krugman or who actually exposed the fact that his own colleagues were all supporting the Iraq war based on lies. Everything's based on lies. The chump is his whole thing. What is it? The final tally was maybe 10,000 or 5. I forget how many lies, right? Whew. I get emphatic because I get exhausted, about the lies. So, COVID here in New Orleans, the saying in Espanol is, o me muero de hambre o me muero de COVID. Either I die of hunger or I die of this COVID disease because people got to work. They're working. They're the essential workers. They're the cashiers. They're still in reconstruction. Our people have sometimes I've seen negligence within the Latin community. I've seen it within the Black community. And I think just there's just this general distrust because the government is never to really be trusted. I'm a big fan of comedians like George Carlin. I saw George Carlin live right after the Iraq War, and I was amazed that the CIA wasn't behind the stage, ready to put him in handcuffs, right? Because the first thing he says, and straight up, and for those of you who may be offended by curses, this is um, my quoting George Carlin. The first thing he says, he goes, "First of all, I just want to tell you, I don't believe a word the fucking government says." Boom, and everyone's laughing, right? And then he talks about the entire selling of the Iraq War. He says, "I don't get choked up about these, yellow ribbons, right? And what is this about? This is just a war of boners." Bush, whose name, and that was Bush the elder, whose name is a vaginal part, right? He's like, it's a slang for a vaginal part, and he says Bush. And now he's trying to make sure that he has a bigger boner than Saddam. And look at the missiles. What do we do? And he says, what is our job in the United States? Bombing brown people. That's what we do. We bomb brown people. When was the last time we bombed some white people? The Nazis. Why? Because they were taking over our job of trying to rule the world. Let's make sure we understand it. That's a brilliant comedian because George Carlin was a brilliant linguist, right? And he speaks straight up, and many of them do. That's why I'm a fan of Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, George Lopez. They bring it. They bring the reality forth, and they use humor as a seductive measure. That's why I try to do with my own shirt that says "No guacamole for immigrant haters." Right? I should have worn that shirt for this interview, um, but
Right.
there's mistrust always. So
Yeah.
COVID is wreaking havoc, and WWNO, the NPR station here, is doing a terrible job of making us invisible, making our pain invisible. We are being erased. Our people, you know, I'm trying to do whatever I can to expose the articles, creating a new project called Immigrant Voices New Orleans, right? Um, just doing whatever I can through my artwork, to my performances, to expose through the video cortaditos. If you saw one of them, the one that was called "Can I Get a Witness?" You see that piece speaking about our people dying, COVID infected, in these brutal ICE jails that are crowded and under deplorable conditions. And they're being tortured there as well. And during the pandemic, lawyers that I know that would normally go there to take on cases to help our asylum seekers, they're all, many of them asylum seekers, many of them just undocumented people who also help to rebuild New Orleans. They're being jailed because it's about the jailing industry. It's not about stopping so-called, illegal immigration. No, it's about a jailing industry because this state, Louisiana, loves to jail Black and brown people. We were the biggest incarcerator of Black people for the longest time. We incarcerated more people in this state than in China, the whole country of China, right? But as the exoneration processes move forward and we're letting out more African Americans, they needed new clients. Who were the new clients? The undocumented, non-citizen, so-called illegal aliens that can be put in there indefinitely to help support a perverse system that is about jails. So our people are dying in these COVID jails, and the local media, NPR here, the WWNO, they're ignoring it. So is the mainstream media because our lives don't matter. Immigrant lives do not matter, especially for undocumented, non-citizen people. They don't matter straight up, right? It's like I want to start putting up signs that say an immigrant got deported today, inspired by the work of what's that artist? By the artist who put a black man was lynched
For the
today.
end. Right.
Right. I forget his name. He just did a big project here. Yeah, I want to start, doing things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So all of my work is about telling the untold story of our immigrant people who have reconstructed this city, who
Yeah.
have given their love, labor, and blood to the rebirth of this city. And then you have this odious book by the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, the LEH, a state arts agency, published this book called it's a tricentennial anthology, New Orleans in the World, from 1718 to 2018, the celebrated anthology, and its scholars, its white scholars and its executive editor, they obliterated us. They disappeared us from history. There's a post-Katrina chapter called Renewal. We are not in that chapter. There's only like one sentence that mentions immigrants being part of the labor force to rebuild the city, and they mentioned Honduran immigrants that, along with young white people, came to rebuild the city. No, thousands upon thousands of immigrants rebuilt the city, and this book is part of the problem. And I've been calling them out for 3 years. And these are white scholars, the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. It's a state arts agency using our own tax dollars to deplorably erase us. An egregious crime. This is a celebrated anthology, and its executive editor has not responded to my petitions and emails, but they're going to be exposed on a national level now, even more so. It's been 3.5 years that I've been calling them out now. And its executive editor, the one in charge, is a white woman scholar who's the wife of the publisher who published my poetry book, right? And she's bilingual, and presents herself as a so-called liberal progressive, yet she was part of the decision-making body. And in that chapter renewal, we are disappeared. So look at that right here. White scholars still with the power to disappear and erase us. But it's not erasure, because erasure would have meant that we were in there in the first place and someone took us out. No, we weren't even in there. We weren't even an afterthought. We were disappeared, culturally deported, and I'm holding them accountable. But all they do is retreat into the refuge of their white privilege. All they do is retreat into the refuge of their white privilege right there on Lafayette Square, Lafayette Street, in the Central Business District area near the Warehouse Arts District. But I've been holding them accountable. They have one little page called Little Honduras and one page for the Vietnamese called Little Vietnam. And in the page for Little Honduras, it's not written by a Latina writer or a Latinx writer or a Latino writer. Um, and they mention, they interview someone from the Chamber of Commerce. And the Chamber of Commerce woman, a Latina woman, I believe she's Cuban, mentions the United Fruit Company as if the United Fruit Company was a glorious organization. The United Fruit Company, if you look at the documentary Blood Fruit, they spilled blood. The United Fruit Company that's celebrating this book, with the leader of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, who apparently felt like, oh my God, I'm going to be in the state arts agency book, and how wonderful, mentions the United Fruit Company as a benevolent organization. They founded and established dictatorships to rule Honduras from New Orleans, from the United Fruit Company offices on Canal Street. It's now that gray old building, federal looking. It's now part of the insectatorium, right? But this is happening now. It was published in 2018, celebrated this book. Not one Latin writer. They chose their African American writers so that they could use some African American people to pimp their, their Eurocentric history. And yes, there's some Black writers. I know a couple of Black writers here, and I've spoken to one of them and let him know. And he's like, wow, they were never told what the full content was until the book came. So no one questioned it, right? But we were left out of the narrative. So it happens continuously, Sarah.
Right.
Whew.
Yeah. Well, that was a great answer. No, I mean, I really appreciate that. And it seems like that is completely central to all of your work. Before we sort of start running out of time, I want to ask you questions about yourself too, especially in regards to COVID. So when did you first learn about COVID-19? Do you remember sort of your initial reactions and realizations that the pandemic was happening?
Yes, it's a good question. So here I am. I'm a big fan of Mardi Gras. My entire persona. Hold on.
No, don't worry.
I've been getting a lot of spam. So
oh no, I totally relate to that.
yeah. So whenever I see a number, it says New Orleans, that I don't understand, because the other day some people using a New Orleans number was a spam for entity trying to scam me. But anyway, so COVID, my first recognition of it. So
Right.
Mardi Gras 2020 happened. I'm a big fan of Mardi Gras. I costumed up and I
Yeah.
paraded with
Oh,
Saint,
good.
the mystic crew of the Secret Society of Saint Anne, which is the oldest gay crew. I have a lot of friends who I know that are part of it, and we get up and I
Mhm.
costumed. And I remember seeing, and we're talking about February 2020 now,
Right.
and it was in
Right.
late February, it was in the 20s when Mardi Gras Day, Fat Tuesday fell. And I remember seeing people in white jumpsuits saying, satirizing the coronavirus with beers of Corona. And I was like, wow, that's funny. and we didn't know the gravity, and yet it was late February. We didn't understand the gravity, and obviously we've come to understand that they knew the gravity, they just weren't, exposing it. And there's been some concern about Mayor Latoya Cantrell, the African American mayor, who's the first African American woman mayor, but unfortunately has done a terrible job in relationship to the immigrant community. And I can get into that a little bit later. And I had interviewed her on the steps of City Hall way back when I was reporting and doing commentaries for National Public Radio. And I did those commentaries from 2006 to 2011. I was the only Latino writer reporting and presenting the many challenges of the post Katrina rebuilding efforts, including one of them that's still archived called Los Invisibles, the invisible ones, because our people were rebuilding city were being erased from all kinds of books here, right? Which is happening today during the pandemic. Our people's pain and the numbers of who's being infected and who's dying has not become news that you read about, even in the paper, NOLA.com, The Advocate, and we just don't hear about it because our people don't matter. But I heard about COVID then, and shortly after Carnival, I went and I performed in Mexico City. I was there March 1st through the 8th. And I was there performing during my birthday. I'm a Pisces born March 3rd, and I was there performing with my mentor, Guillermo Gomez Peña, and it was a release of a new book. It was first released as a PDF. The book is called Glosolalia. They have some of my experimental pieces in there, Spanglish, and that deal with this dehumanization, the illegal aliens thing. It's got excerpts from my solo show, Aliens, Immigrants, and Other Evildoers. But when I got to Mexico, there was all kinds of, of news about the pandemic, even more so. In fact, I was concerned whether I would be able to get back into the country. And we're talking about March 1st through the 8th, right? So they're starting talking about,
Totally.
right. So they started talking about that the situation now was becoming a pandemic worldwide. So I became very conscious early on. The first notices were during Carnival, but we didn't take it seriously because we weren't told to take it seriously. And getting back, we're not sure whether at least the mayor has expressed that she wasn't told about the seriousness because post Mardi Gras, 3 weeks after, New Orleans became one of the hot points. Like New York City, Detroit, and New Orleans were the top three. And
Yeah,
why? Because they estimated like 50,000 people were infected. We have all kinds, we had 1.5 million
wow.
people coming in for Mardi Gras, and everyone's costumed and kissing and exchanging, all kinds of fluids, maybe out on the streets or just in general. No one, we were masking, but the maskings that our face masks and our costumes, but we became one of the epicenters per capita. And the fallout was because of Mardi Gras 2020. So there was debate whether the mayor knew but needed the tax dollars because New Orleans is really offers big revenue to the city because of all the incoming tourists, right? 1.5 million descend upon the city, and this is a city that's still 400,000. Maybe we're reaching 500,000, so it's a lot of people. And that's when I became very much aware when I got back. But then 2 days later, from arriving here in Mexico, from Mexico City here in New Orleans, 2 days later, I flew to Atlanta to go and perform there. And the Atlanta project, by the time I got there, the COVID alarms were going off a little bit further. I got back here on Monday, March 16th, but I was there in Atlanta from that Tuesday. I think it was the 10th or the 16th. And I performed. We did some workshops. We socially distanced in the workshop. I still did the performances. Our crowds were small, and some came masked because of the pandemic concerns. The theater sat like maybe 80 or 90 people, maybe 100, and we had small crowds of 20 people max, and they were all distanced. But when I landed from Atlanta, and I was grateful that they kept that project up, that they didn't cancel, because as soon as I got back in on Monday, March 16th, the national pandemic lockdown began. And immediately the projects, I was supposed to be here for just a couple of days and go to the University of Virginia in late March and early April, and then Gala Hispanic Theater. And immediately $10,000 were wiped away. And then by mid-April, by this time, the tsunami of cancellations came up uh, with the Detroit Institute of the Arts, the Toronto International Theater Festival, and other projects that were in development. So at this point, the pandemic brutality has been very real for me. I am in the process of filing personal bankruptcy. I've lost $30,000. And it's not like I laughed my way to the bank. I'd love to go to the bank and go, and laugh my way to the bank as a performance artist. But no. But what happens also when you lose that work, you lose the years of developing those projects that have been built on grants, that have been built on developing relationships. So all that I got wiped out. So by June, after Father's Day, mid June, I had a nervous breakdown because of one, the housing challenges that we're experiencing. And I've been experiencing housing challenges. I just wrote to you about that because the house was being renovated. I wasn't sure it was up for sale, and the situation with the landlord was challenging. And I'm being diplomatic at best.
Right.
Breakdown because I realized that I knew right away as soon as the fallout came that I was going to be in the process. And I texted a friend of mine in the arts world, I'm going to need to file bankruptcy. By June, everything was wiped out. I was surviving literally on COVID relief grant and a couple of grants that were coming in from some um, grant projects that I had been awarded. But it was brutal. So I spent 2 days just crying. I wasn't going to go to any hospital. You know, what am I going to do? June 2020, I'm not going to go to a hospital and get infected. And I was doing everything I could to make sure it was just a bubble between me, my boys, their mama, and maybe a friend or two that we would meet on the porch, masked, and do, and hang. But it's been brutal. And then by the fall, the pandemic lockdowns continued in the winter, and more projects that were going to be rescheduled for the spring and the fall of 2020 and spring of 2021 were wiped out, right? And it's been brutal. So I had another breakdown right after the holidays. I had another emotional breakdown. And literally, just on March 31st, my landlord calls me to tell me that she's got someone interested in my apartment for rent. And I didn't even know my place was up for rent. They've been renovating this house. They renovated the apartment next door that rented for 700. Now the rent is 1,500. They renovated fully. Yeah,
Wow.
crazy, right? So during a pandemic, but the previous tenant, he had left, or maybe he was paying 800 because I was paying 850, but he had been here longer, so our rents were a little bit different. But he left in August of last year. They began renovating that apartment, and I've had challenging situations with the foreman and some of the workers, right, because of the construction that's happened. But my landlord never renews my lease, never renewed the lease in August of last year. And I knew that if you don't have a lease, then I know that you're subject to the whims of the landlord. So I thought the property was being renovated to be sold. They didn't renovate my apartment in any way. So knowing that there was an eviction hanging, I began looking for apartments around September, October, like during the month of maybe October, November, maybe November, December, and January. I must have seen a dozen places, and I've seen the rent skyrocket, $1,200 for dumps, and I need to make sure I have a second bedroom for my boys. I need to make sure I have a working space, right? I've been staging all of my Zoom shows right from this area with the artwork in the background.
It's a beautiful
So
background. Yeah.
thank you. And it's been brutal. And then that was offered to me a really hard choice on this March 31st phone call. Either I accepted a $400 rent increase or I was evicted by May 1st. May 1st is around the corner. That was what and I had told my boys, I think I'm developing a better relationship with my landlord. But when it comes to landlords here, they can do whatever they can. And I had no choice. I even spoke to a lawyer. So I had to negotiate down to 300. So it went to 1150. And that was excruciating to be able to negotiate or be told that you were going to be evicted by May 1st. So that offered me another breakdown. And I've been weepy. I've had moments I have had bouts of insomnia. And back in June, I was suffering from bouts of insomnia as well. And I was doing those video cortaditos with a grant that I received. And I do whatever I can, writing and still creating performances. So it's been brutal.
Yeah.
It's been brutal. It's been
Yeah.
a time. I've experienced the full expansive brutality, the housing challenges, insecurities,
The
having your rent,
housing.
yeah, having your rent go up 40% during a pandemic, right? Um, Having no choice to deal with that, having, either face an eviction or just pay up. I just signed the lease and I have to figure out how to pay the 1,150. I'm doing whatever I
Right.
can. I have scholars who know my work and they've been engaging me to do Zoom performances. And I'm trying to, just
Yeah.
received another COVID relief grant. I've been able to survive on COVID relief grants from a number of arts organizations. So that's been the reality for me.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you, sharing your story with us. And I know this past year has been kind of traumatic for everyone, but I think especially for people whose jobs really depend on in-person events and for artists in
People in
particular,
performance,
So I
theater
really,
performers and musicians, we who perform in front of
yeah,
live audiences. When will we be able to say, I just sold out a 90-seat theater? I remember Alien Immigrant sold
yeah,
out a 200-seat theater in Vanderbilt. Is that possible in the future? Zoom is not going away. I'm trying to do Zoom performances. And when I do them,
yeah,
they're pretty wild. They're pretty intense,
yeah,
and they have been well received. And I've been teaching creative writing breakdown. I'm sorry. I've been teaching creative writing workshops with St. Mary's College. I've
right,
been teaching physical theater workshops with University of Virginia. Even video workshops on the video shorts that I've made, and physical performance workshops with Arizona State University, and performing my new show, Immigrant Dreams and excuse me, I've been performing the new show called Immigrant Dreams and Alien Nightmares via Zoom
hmm,
to the University of Memphis, ASU West, St. Mary's College, and a couple of other places. And it's been hard living in a Big Easy. I was fortunate enough to receive an award from the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, a small grant to begin putting together the book called Hard Living in a Big Easy: Immigrants and the Photography of Post-Katrina Protest from 2010 to 2019. I have a decade of documentation of the immigrant groups here, especially the Congress of Day Laborers, um, who has mounted all kinds of acts of civil disobedience and resistance to the labor exploitation here. And that's what the LEHs want to do. They don't want to expose the reality of what immigrants have suffered here. So they rather just erase us from the picture, or just actually exclude us and culturally deport us. Because wage theft has been a big problem here. You know, um, brutal working conditions, deplorable working conditions, and immigrants who have repaired even City Hall and even other structures here. They have repaired churches, galleries, office buildings, administrative buildings for arts organizations. But many of them have been deported because it's been easy and it's been documented where immigrants will do a job and then they bring in ICE and deport the immigrants and then they don't pay them. I mean, that's the brutality of what has happened here. This has been the epicenter. If it gets documented, and I'm trying to do my best now to just concentrate on writing and getting the book out, but I have these fabulous black and white photographs and some of them in color. If it gets documented the way it needs to be, the way I've been writing about it, this is going to be one of the largest episodes of labor exploitation in this country's current history. It's been happening since the storm. Now I'm not sure where things are, but only a couple of years ago, I was going to a meeting with the Congress of Day Laborers before the pandemic when they were meeting at one of the churches here. And yes, labor and wage theft, labor exploitation, wage theft was still happening. It will be, as I expose it, it will be one of the largest episodes of wage theft and labor exploitation. And the media, only one paper has done some job of some, writing about it, and that's the Gambit Weekly. Associated now, it's been bought up by the Advocate, so one doesn't know. The Advocate, although I do have an editor there that's supportive of my work, and it was a recent story. I think I sent you the link of a recent story that was written about my work in the Open
yeah,
Studios. And that was one of the salvaging moments of great joy during the pandemic this past fall when I was accepted finally after a couple of tries, because I had been recommended by a well-known curator of color here who knew my work, to the Joan Mitchell Center Artists in Residency. That was a great joy. And I got the chance
congratulations.
to work. Yes, and I got a chance to work. Look at this. This is the master
Wow,
painting. This
that's
is it.
beautiful.
This is it. This is 6 by 4, right?
That's beautiful. That's really impressive. And congratulations. It's
And
really
this,
deserved.
thank you. And this was one, right? This was one of the pieces that I began working on it, and I just
Yeah.
recently finished it, right? And this is another one that was begun
Oh wow,
there.
that's beautiful.
Immigrant Father and Baby Dream, right? And this is some of the older pieces, but I just delivered some of the new pieces, and here's some of the photographs, right? I just delivered some of the. I'm not sure if you can see them well,
No, yeah, I
you
can.
know.
I see the one on the mantle.
Right, right. So, um, the works are inspired by the photographs. So I do whatever I can, whatever media to tell my people's story. I'm the only artist in the Deep South dealing with these issues. I'm the only artist in New Orleans, the only immigrant artist. I wasn't born here. I was born in Ecuador. I'm a U.S. citizen now. Um, but I'm trying to use this various platforms in various genres, performance, painting, the visual arts, writing, video shorts, to tell my people's story of persecution during this brutal era of anti-immigrant hysteria. These pieces are now
Yeah.
called new works from another chapter of anti-immigrant hysteria, because this is another chapter. Let's remember the Fugitive Slave Act, 1798, right? To stop runaway slaves. And run away, to stop from people who were rightfully running away from being enslaved in the South. The South has an odious labor exploitation legacy, right? So of course the new immigrants and the new people to exploit were undocumented people, right? Because they could be exploited, their labor could be used, they could do the muscle work, and then they could be deported. I mean, how fabulously insidious is that system, right? And you live in Texas, one of the great, states of brutal exploitation as well. And it used to be part of northern Mexico, the same way all of the northern territories of Mexico, from Texas to California, Oklahoma, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, all part of the northern territories of Mexico,
Yeah.
stolen by the United States when they invaded Mexico. And a very lesser known president, Polk, only 4 years, as soon as he was elected, his inaugural speech began beating the drums for the invasion of Mexico. It was right around the time Manifest Destiny was being written about in Monroe Doctrine. Manifest Destiny could have been called white supremacy as well, because that's what it was about. It was giving the United States the power to decide how the hemispheric Americas were going to be ruled, meaning how we were going to impose. How do you want us? You want me to believe in the CIA and the FBI? We're told about Mueller and his report. How am I going to believe in the FBI? How am I going to believe in an institution that wanted to jail and execute and kill Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez? How am I going to support an institution that had a hit list with Hoover, who was a closeted gay man, who had a hit list, who wanted to kill James Baldwin, expose his homosexuality, who wanted to kill Malcolm X, who wanted to kill MLK? This is who we are. This is who the FBI is. And the CIA, come on now, Bush the Elder. I'm going to break it down. Bush the Elder helped to support the CIA invasion and put in Pinochet to bring down the democratic, socially elected Allende. This is who we are. One of my next projects is who we are, looking at all the atrocities. I get emphatic and I get outraged because it's outrageous. But what's really amazing, Sarah, is the veil. It's the veil. And who's pimping those lines? In LA, it's a place called Hollywood. It's called Hollywood. They pimp the lines. Imagine if there were more Native American producers in Hollywood, we would hear a lot more about the atrocities. If there were indigenous people, about the atrocities. Buy yourself a calendar of Native atrocities. Every day there was an atrocity committed against our indigenous Native people. Here, Bienville, like I said, killed the Atacapa, the Tunica, the Natchez, the Homa, and he celebrated with a statue. Andrew Jackson wrote the Indian Removal Act. Let's make sure. The Chinese Exclusion Act, 1882. Let's not forget this. But again, it's the United States of amnesia. But you have a Hollywood system that continues to pimp white Christian Aryan narratives. Males. Now some women are getting in the picture, but still lies. And then we celebrate, we have to applaud. Oh my God, they have a black person. Oh, they're doing August Wilson's play. Yes, of course, I saw it. Chadwick Boseman needed to have been awarded back in 2014 for playing James Brown. Everyone knew it. He killed it. He's an amazing actor, right? Right. And the same thing with Benjamin Bratt. It's got a very interesting name, but he's the Latino. He's the one who played Piñero. He played the poet Piñero.
Right.
I don't know if you've seen that. He played the poet Piñero, and maybe I forget when that was, but he was amazing. He never got nominated because we don't matter to the system. People of color don't matter. Yes, we're seeing more, but in relationship to the plethora of white women and white male directors, it's a beginning. But Hollywood frames and pimps the lies. That's why I thought what Peck did with I Am Not Your Negro was brutally brilliant, because he exposed, and Baldwin says it, if John Wayne, a white man, killing all the, admonishing and killing the Indians, he's a genocidal murderer. He's celebrated. And he says it. If an African-American man, the same way when I see black, I see brown. When a black and a brown man says, give me liberty or give me death, and he says it, that individual will be shut down immediately, because you can't have that. So let's expose the lies. We're at a time of social reckoning. That's why I want to wreck the real situation and expose the truth of white scholars still doing this, still pimping lies and bringing us and putting us out of the picture, bringing us to what I call cultural genocide, cultural deportation, by disappearing us in a book that's everywhere. I'm going to be speaking to the libraries, because this book is in the 2 schools my boys go to. It's in the library schools. It's in all the state libraries. It's in all the public libraries, and probably in libraries across the country, representing the tricentennial anthology, the 300 years. And we had disappeared from the narrative. It's still happening. I get emphatic and I get outraged because it's still there right in front of us, and it's 2021. We're under a period of reconstruction. Sir. No guacamole for immigrant haters, because you can't love the food and dehumanize the cooks. And that's going to be one of the next shows that I do with my character, Pachuco, who dresses like this, goes, orale, check it out. Check it out, Sarah. They called it the Indian Removal Act, Andrew Jackson, no? They could have called it Operation Iraqi Freedom, right? But no, Indian Removal Act, Andrew Jackson wrote it into law until 1830. And they took all the native people, the indigenous tribes from the northern territories of Georgia, what you call Appalachia, no? And they forced them to walk 1,000 miles, Muskogee, Cherokee, and other tribes, 1,000 miles in one of the most brutal winters in 1830. Union troops actually shot down and killed native children, and they refused to walk. It was brutal. Walking 1,000 miles to Oklahoma. Who wants to go to Oklahoma? They don't even have a baseball team there.
I love that. That's amazing. Right? Yeah, I loved that in the movie as well. I thought the characters were so clever, and it made it so entertaining. It was just great. Yeah.
All right, with Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yes, right? Yes. Yeah.
Well, we got to bring humor in, because I just noticed I get really riled up. So humor is really important. And what I love when Obi-Wan Kenobi says, orale, this is Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yes.
And whiteness is dead. It died at 2 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon near the salad bar of an overdose of mediocrity.
I loved that.
But don't panic. You've been eating so many tacos on Tuesdays. You're Hispanic. Ooh, look at you, right? So we got to use that humor. I need the humor. You need the humor. Yeah. Otherwise, I lose my mind. I want to make sure I celebrate my boys, Darius Amancio Torres-Copeland and Diego Arjuna Torres-Copeland. My 2 boys, they have been so meaningful to me during this pandemic, darling. They have been so meaningful. And please know, when I call you darling, it's the endearments that are local to New Orleans.
I don't mind.
Take away anything from your feminist perspectives. And
it doesn't bother me.
In Latino culture, we also use a lot of endearments, queridas, and honey. Here they use baby. Men call themselves, how you doing, baby? And I love that. But it's been my boys, our bike rides to the river. My boys have kept me sane during one of the hardest times of my life. Yeah. I just turned 60.
Congratulations.
Right. And people are surprised when I share that, because most people think like, wow, I thought you were in your late 40s or early 50s, right? Mm. And I try to take care of myself. I'm vegetarian. I do whatever I can. I try to eat healthy. But the pandemic has been brutally on me emotionally. It's been my boys. It's been my boys and their love and their hybrid nature. And that's why this piece, Immigrant Father, it's called Immigrant Father and Baby Dream. And it's based on a photograph, right? It's based on this photograph here. You see that, right?
Oh yeah, I can. Oh, that's beautiful.
based on one of the photographs, and I have a large version of that. So I tell my boys, you are my baby dreams of your immigrant father fighting for social justice for our people. And I tell them, their mother's a gringa girl from San Diego, and we're divorced, but we're still a family. We're
Mhm.
still they're 3 blocks away, and that's why it's been so meaningful for me to live here because they could walk. I don't want to have to drive to another part of
Yeah.
town. But my boys have kept me sane. Their love, their unconditional love, and that which unconditional love, they have made me a better human being. It is they who have given me the moments of joy. Our bicycle to the rivers, playing racquetball by the river, you know, eating. I was concerned that I was going to be touring a lot last year because I get worried when I leave and I don't see them. I miss them terribly,
Yeah.
and they're 11 and 14, so they really need their papa. And I'm trying to be the father I never had. My biological father was an invisible man. He wasn't even a ghost. I try to explain to my mom, at least ghosts haunt you every once in a while. And see, some jokes I do, not just for me, but for you. So, and my stepfather, a wonderful man, but we didn't have the best relationship. He had an incredible
Right.
work ethic, and I really appreciated a Peruvian immigrant himself, and I'm grateful that he's so. But it was challenging. It's gotten better, but
Yeah.
it was challenging. And that relationship that sometimes has to stepfather to this day, my stepfather has never said I love you. I tell my boys I love you every day. In fact,
Yeah.
just before getting on this call, I was preparing their lunches. We eat fish, so I made them salmon tacos to pick them up. I'm going to pick them up shortly. We've got another 5 minutes that we can hang here, but
Okay.
it's been my boys, Sarah, that have kept me sane,
Yeah.
trying to be the father I never had.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really touching. I mean, um, I've loved everything that you've had to say. I really appreciate that you're willing to share your sort of personal stories. That I think is really impactful, and the work you do is so important. And so I feel really lucky that you were willing to share it with us. And if there's anything else, I know we have a few more minutes. If there's anything else that you want to add before I go ahead and stop the recording, I would love to. I would love to hear it.
It's the personal story that humanizes us.
Yeah.
That's why I try to present the personal story of our immigrant people. And the film, Rodrigo Dorfman, who created the film, I've known him since 1995 when I first performed at Duke University. He's the son of Ariel Dorfman, the incredible Chilean writer who wrote many books, including being a scholar. He was set to be executed by the Pinochet government. So they had to
Wow.
flee. They had
Yeah.
to flee. The scholars had to flee in Chile. They fled, and Rodrigo and it was just him. And later on, they fled. I think Rodrigo was 7 at the time. They fled because let's remember that was when did that take place? That was in the 70s. The CIA, supported by Bush the Elder, in the invasion with one of the most brutal dictators whoever ruled in South America. CIA supported Trujillo. The CIA supported Somoza, 40 years of family dictatorships in Nicaragua. So, let's make sure we understand the blood on the hands of this empire that has migrated deep into the dark side. And all we have is our human story. So people, a lot of times, writers say, oh, well, your work is very political. I said, no, it's not political. It's humanist. I happen to be speaking from my human perspective, and this body is incarnated again here as a brown mestizo immigrant from South America. But I'm not an immigrant. I'm indigenous to the
Right.
land. The Europeans are the immigrants. So the entire
Right.
world is turned upside down,
Right.
right?
I love.
The ruling
Yeah.
class that ruled, they are the sons and daughters of illegal immigrants. But again, the pilgrims arrived without papers and nobody deported them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sentiment. Right? Like people say, like the personal is political, and I feel like your work is a perfect example of that being true. You know?
And Picasso said every work is political. If you decide to make abstract paintings, that's a political statement. That's what moves you. You're not interested in some other realities. And that's okay. I don't have the privilege. I can't bask in the privilege I'm not afforded to make abstract work when my brown immigrant body is under attack and my immigrant community has been under attack post 9/11, since the Bush administration, and since Caro began speaking double and triple speak, where justice became torture, freedom became war. Remember, it was freedom and it was called an Iraq War operation. Originally, it was kind of called uh, Operation Operation Iraqi Liberation, which
Wow.
spelled oil. Which spelled oil. I know because I have a Fox News friend of mine. Yeah, they effed that
Wow,
up.
that is
It's
really interesting.
yeah, I have a Fox News friend of mine who, well, he was an African American, worked with Fox News,
Oh,
and that
wow.
was one of the original things they were calling it, Operation Iraqi Liberation, and the acronym was oil, and it was like, oh my God, that looks too true.
Right.
It, it went with Operation Iraqi Freedom. So,
Yeah.
and
Wow, that
remember,
is so interesting.
yeah, and Karl Rove brought in the double speak and triple speak, right? Justice became torture, you know, freedom became oppression, and war, right? War became, right? War became peace, right? Because they were, peacekeepers. The missiles are called peacekeepers. Come on now.
Mm.
We invaded a country built on lies that Bush and that whole cadre of criminals, Wolfowitz, and there was one Chicano writer that said, there's nothing to celebrate about Alberto Gonzalez. Yes, he's the first Mexican to be in that position, but he's a Mexican who helped to sign documents to torture people. He was the lawyer of Bush W, right? Come on now. Have you seen the movie Vice?
Vice?
Yeah,
I
about
don't
the
think I
Vice.
have, no.
Oh, you should check it out, about Cheney.
Oh, I will.
Well done.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. But I'm gonna have to go, Sarah.
Okay, well, it was so wonderful talking to you.